Welcome to the first video from the City of St. Helens Finance Department. In this video, we will give a general overview of fund accounting. Fund accounting is the method that the City of St. Helens and all governments use to track money. This video should help you understand how the city is set up financially. We will go through each fund that the city has and talk about its purpose. The goal at the end of this video is for you to have a better understanding of the city's budget and how we operate. So let's get started. The most important thing to remember about how governments create a budget is that they emphasize accountability rather than profitability. The goal of most businesses is to make money. That is never the goal of government. Governmental fund accounting shows accountability to the community that the government serves. This includes documenting all the revenue that comes into the organization, as well as the money that the organization spends. Fund accounting is used in all governments and most professional and large nonprofit organizations. At the City of St. Helens, we create different funds to track our revenue. That's money that we receive or collect. And we track expenses. That's what we spend our money on. Each of these funds have a specific purpose that has dedicated revenue only meant to be used in a specific purpose. These different funds are like a person opening up multiple savings and checking accounts to better track a personal budget. One way to think about all the different funds that the city has is to think about each fund as its own separate bucket. Each bucket has resources, or revenue, coming into the bucket. However, the money that goes into each bucket can only be spent on certain things. This is why government uses fund accounting. It helps guarantee that there is accountability for the expenses in each fund, and ensures that the funds are spent appropriately. Different states in the U.S. have different rules about how their government agencies can use fund accounting. In Oregon, these funds, or buckets, are arranged into three main categories, and then subcategories after that. Let's take a look at that at the next slide. Oregon budget law requires that three main categories appear in government budgets. The first category is called governmental funds. These are funds that are used to pay for activities that come from money collected from taxes, grants, and other similar revenue sources. The second category is proprietary funds. These are funds used for activities that are supported mainly by fees or charges to customers. The third category is called fiduciary funds. These are funds for resources that a government agency may hold on to on behalf of a third party. These funds cannot be used to support any government programs. Let's look at the subcategories of these main areas. Within governmental funds, there are 5 subcategories. They are general fund, special revenue, capital projects, debt service, and permanent fund. The City of St. Helens only uses the first 2 subcategories, which are the general fund and special revenue funds. I have highlighted those borders in light brown, and we'll talk about those in a little bit more detail on the next slide. With proprietary funds, there are only 2 subcategories, and St. Helens uses both of them. They are called enterprise funds and internal service funds. Once again, I've highlighted those in light brown to signify that they're used within the City of St. Helens. Lastly, with fiduciary funds, there are 4 main categories: agency fund, investment trusts, pension benefits, and private purpose funds. The City of St. Helens does not have any fiduciary funds currently set up within our organization. Because of this, we will not be discussing the specifics of those funds and their purpose. At the City of St. Helens, we try to keep things as simple, transparent, and clear as possible to ensure that we remain accountable to not only the elected City Council, but also our community members. Like we showed on the last slide, the City of St. Helens operates with only 2 of the 3 main categories: governmental funds and proprietary funds. We then show the subcategories within those main categories. Under governmental funds, there is general fund and special revenue funds. And under proprietary funds, there are enterprise funds and internal service funds. Let's briefly review these types of subcategory funds. The general fund is the main operational fund for governments. It is usually where all unrestricted revenue comes into the city. Unrestricted revenue is money that the city receives that may be used for any government service. This is different from restricted revenue, which is money that the city receives that can only be used for a specific purpose. In the general fund, one of the most important types of unrestricted revenue that the city receives is property tax revenue. Revenue sources in the general fund are generally unrestricted, and this is the fund that most departments operate out of. Special revenue funds are used when the city receives funding that is intended for a specific purpose. This is the restricted revenue that we talked about earlier. Most notably for the city of St. Helens, this is where tourism operates out of. Transient room fees, more commonly referred to as motel and hotel taxes, is money that the city receives that can only be used for tourism activities. Because of this restricted use, the money is tracked in a specific special revenue fund to ensure that it is spent appropriately and legally. Enterprise funds are funds that are set up to track government operations that are intended to be self-sustainable and pay for themselves. These types of government services are the ones that are run the most like a private business. For the City of St. Helens, these are mainly the water, sewer, and storm utility funds. The intention of an enterprise fund is to balance the revenues coming into the fund against the expenses needed to operate the service being provided. For example, water revenue from utility bills must pay for water expenses. The last fund you will see in the City of St. Helens is internal service funds. These are generally funds that are created to track services like major equipment replacements and IT services. Revenue for this fund comes from making internal charges to each department. For example, we charge each department a certain amount for IT services. This ensures that each department is paying their fair share compared to the cost of IT services throughout the year. Now that you understand the main categories, let's review the specific fund names that you see in the St. Helens budget and where these funds appear within each of these categories that we've already talked about. On this slide, we will identify where each of the city's funds fall within these categories. On the next slide, we will talk about each fund in more detail. As we showed on the previous slide, the general fund is the main fund for the city. Under special revenue funds, the city operates 3 separate funds: Community Development, Community Enhancement, and Street Fund. Under the enterprise funds, the city operates 8 separate funds: Streets Sdc, Water Sdc, Sewer Sdc, Storm Sdc, Parks Sdc, and the Water, Sewer, and Storm. Under internal service funds, the city operates 4 separate funds: Equipment, IT Services, Public Works Operations, and Major Maintenance. Now let's review each of these funds in more detail. The general fund is where you will find the largest portion of any government budget. As mentioned earlier, it is where the majority of city departments appear. The City of St. Helens currently runs departments like Administration, City Recorder, City Council, Municipal Court, Police, Library, Finance, Parks, Recreation, Building, and Planning. All of these departments share revenue within the general fund. In the majority of cases, governments place departments in the general fund that cannot solely support themselves. For example, the library department operates with a budget of over $700,000 per year, but they do not bring in enough resources or revenue to support themselves. When the city operates several departments within the general fund, we can pool our unrestricted resources to help pay for operations and services. The Community Development Fund includes economic development services within our community. There are 5 separate departments within the Community Development Fund: Forestry, Tourism, Industrial Business Park, Waterfront Property, and Economic Planning. In past years, the city has received several grants to complete studies and plans for economic development ideas. Those resources and expenses reside within this fund. The Community Enhancement Fund is a generic catch-all fund for many miscellaneous resources that we receive for a specific use. This fund is often used for grants. Grants received for police, library, or other departments can go in here to ensure that the funds are correctly tracked to meet the grant requirements. Most recently, the funds are used to track revenue and expenses for the Arts and Cultural Commission, as well as grants for Community Action Team. The last special revenue fund that the city operates is the Street Fund. This fund provides the money for maintenance and repair of the 50-plus miles of paved and unpaved streets that are under the city's jurisdiction. The main revenue source for the Street Fund is the motor vehicle tax from the state of Oregon. Another main revenue source is this fund is grant funds, often referred to as STP funds or System Transportation Plan funds. These are grant funds that are for the maintenance and upgrades of roads from the state of Oregon. Now that we have covered governmental funds, let's take a look at proprietary funds within the city of St. Helens. Let's talk about the 5 SDC funds the city has. SDC stands for System Development Charges. These are fees that are paid by developers, builders, and homeowners when they develop a property or build a house, commercial building, or industrial building within the city limits. The fees are designed to collect money that is needed to expand or upgrade certain services because of the additional development happening. Examples of this include the city needing to build and improve parks because there are more people that now live in our community, or expanding the water filtration facility, or expanding our wastewater treatment plant because the new business and homes require the city to provide more water or more treatment than it did before. And building and maintaining new roads or widening existing ones because more traffic is in town. System development charges are a way to capture that and ensure that development within the city is paying a fair share of additional capacity needs for each of our systems. A separate fund is set up for each system within the city. The reason each system has a separate fund is because it is illegal for a city to spend SDC funds on any other systems or projects. For example, if the city receives $10,000 in street SDC revenue, the city cannot spend any of that money on building a new park. The $10,000 must be spent on street improvements, and more specifically, street improvements that have been identified in a master plan that has been professionally completed and adopted by City Council. On a side note, this is often why you see cities spending money on professional companies to complete master plans. If you are following best practices, these master plans should be updated at least every 5 to 7 years to take into consideration any new development that has happened during that time and any future development that might take place down the road. Having an updated master plan ensures that a city is capturing appropriate levels of growth. This helps us plan for expansion and upgrades and helps us collect and correct the amount of SDC fees to ensure that we have the money available for developing a growing system like streets, water, sewer, storm, and parks. The next proprietary fund that the city has is enterprise funds. This is separated into water, sewer, and storm. These funds are where your utility bill revenue goes. Each charge on your utility bill goes into its own separate fund. The water portion of your utility bill goes into the water fund, and so on and so forth. Each of these funds are separated individually because the money collected, the revenue, should be able to be supported by the government operations. The final set of funds within the City of St. Helens is the Internal Service Funds. Each is set up as an individual fund to ensure accountability and tracking for each revenue and expense. The Equipment Fund is used mainly by Public Works to help set aside funds each year for major equipment replacement. IT services are charged to each department in the city to cover the cost of IT staff, as well as ongoing maintenance and replacement of IT equipment throughout the city. Public Works Operations is set up to help us easily track expenses for our enterprise funds. In many cases, it can be difficult to identify if a public works expense is solely for water, sewer, or storm. Often purchases that are made can be used for each of these services. So these expenses are shown in this fund. If an expense can clearly be identified as solely for water, sewer, and storm, then those expenses are shown in the actual enterprise fund. The last internal service fund is major maintenance. This fund is used to set aside funds for facility maintenance and major improvements around the city. That covers our basic overview of the City of St. Helens. I hope you enjoyed this first video and overview of fund accounting and the general setup of the finances of the City of St. Helens. Once again, here's a basic breakdown of each fund that the city operates. Thank you for watching this informational video. We hope that you now have a better understanding of how the City of St. Helens is organized financially. If you would like any additional information regarding this presentation, please do not hesitate to reach out to us, and we would be happy to answer any questions you may have. Here's the city's web address, the city's general phone number, and my email address. Thanks for watching.